to me, and I say this as objectively as I possibly can, Rich, the league's verdict was Shedeur was not a good enough prospect as a player.
Like, golly, that's enough's enough. Like, how is he still there at some point in time? I don't care what if he turned you off or what have you, but it's split. When you talk to people in the league, I've talked to some folks in the league who are connected to one side of that organization that say there's no way. They're not taking Shedeur. It's not happening.
Sources from the meetings are saying worst meeting of all time. Not even close. Not even like worst meeting of all time. Now, granted, all these could be a little bit dramatized.
To the producers, I need you to leave Dan Orlovsky and Swagger up on that screen while I'm talking, because I want to see them during this soliloquy I'm about to drop on you.
I say this as objectively as I possibly can. Rich, the league's verdict was Shedeur was not a good enough prospect as a player. You're going off the board that you have. So, don't skip a single second of this video. And if this story touches your heart, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? Let's begin. Pick 144. Round 5. Say it out loud. Pick 144. Round 5. That's where Shedeur Sanders heard his name called. Not round 1, not round 2, not even round 3 or 4. Round 5. Pick 144. Let that number sit on your chest for a second, because what we just watched unfold over that draft weekend wasn't football. It was something else entirely. Think about where we were just a few months ago. This was a kid being talked about as a top 3 quarterback in the entire class. Tape that scouts were quietly comparing to first-round arms. A name that trended on every single platform for 2 straight years. A bloodline that single-handedly took a dead Power 5 program and turned Boulder, Colorado into the most watched team in college football on a Saturday afternoon. And we're supposed to believe, we're supposed to nod our heads and accept that this same quarterback sat on the board through Friday night, through most of Saturday morning, watching kickers come off, long snappers come off, developmental tackles nobody outside of their hometown had ever heard of come off, before his phone finally rang. Are you kidding me? Are we really doing this? And then you hear Tom Pelissero on Rich Eisen's show, calm and measured, telling us the league's verdict was that Shedeur just wasn't good enough as a player. I respect Tom, I do. But let's push back on that framing right now, because that's the version of the story the league wants you to swallow. That's the clean, sanitized take that lets 20-something front offices off the hook. Front offices don't just grade tape. They grade personalities. They grade families. They grade narratives. They grade what they call fit, which is a code word for whether you make their building feel comfortable. And when you understand that, the whole picture changes. This slide was not about throwing motion. This slide was not about pocket presence. This slide was not about arm talent, or 3 cone times, or how he looked in shorts at the combine. This was about something deeper, something messier, something the suits in those war rooms are never going to admit on camera. So here's the question I want you sitting with for the next 15 minutes. Do you really believe that 20-something NFL teams with entire scouting departments, analytics staffs, quarterback coaches, general managers paid millions of dollars to evaluate this exact position, all simultaneously forgot how to evaluate a quarterback with the production he had, on the stage he played on, under the spotlight he lived in for 2 straight seasons? Do you actually believe that? Because I don't. Not for 1 second. And what we're about to get into is going to make a whole lot of decision makers look very, very small. Let's talk about what actually happened in those draft rooms. Because the league wants you to believe one story, and the truth is sitting right underneath it, waiting for somebody to say it out loud. So let me be that somebody. You've heard the leaks by now. Worst meeting of all time. That exact phrase. Not paraphrased. Not summarized. The exact same words coming out of multiple organizations across the country in the same 48-hour window. And we're supposed to believe that's organic? We're supposed to believe that front offices in completely different cities with completely different staffs who allegedly never spoke to each other all walked out of separate meetings and independently arrived at the identical phrase? Come on, use your brain for a second. That's not a coincidence. That's not a shared experience. That is a coordinated message being walked to reporters with a wink and a nod. That is the league talking to itself in public. And then there's the other thread Pelissero pulled, that Shedeur was reportedly locked in on a handful of teams picking in the top 7 and didn't give the same energy to the bottom of the league. Okay, maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. But let me ask you something. Plenty of quarterbacks have bombed interviews and still gone in round 1. Plenty of prospects have walked into team facilities and stunk the place up and still heard their name called inside the first 10 picks. Why? Because the league has always decided who gets grace and who doesn't. Always. Stephen A. said it on air and he wasn't wrong. Greater the talent, greater the tolerance. That's the unwritten rule that's been running this league for 50 years. And the flip side of that rule is the part nobody wants to admit. When the league decides you don't get tolerance, suddenly every flaw becomes a fatal flaw. Suddenly every meeting becomes the worst meeting ever. Suddenly the same confidence that gets called swagger on a first-round pick gets called arrogance on you. We've seen this movie before. Dion himself pulled this exact playbook back in his draft, told teams where he wouldn't go, told them what it would cost, and the league never forgot it. Eli Manning forced his way out of San Diego, and the establishment grumbled about it for a decade. Every single time a young man walks into this league acting like he has leverage, the suits in the offices close ranks and remind him who actually runs this thing. And Shedeur, no agent, dad in his ear, telegraphing where he wanted to play, he committed the one sin this league does not forgive. He acted like the power was his. So let me say this plain. Shedeur Sanders did not slide because of his arm. He did not slide because of his footwork. He slid because of his last name, because of his confidence, and because he refused to flinch when the league wanted him to bow. And what came next? That part is where it gets really interesting. Now let's talk about Cleveland. Because of all the places this kid could have landed, of all the cities, all the buildings, all the quarterback rooms in the National Football League, he ended up in the one franchise that has been running on quarterback chaos for the better part of 2 decades. And depending on how you look at it, that's either the worst possible outcome or the single biggest gift the football gods could have handed him. Look at this depth chart honestly. Really look at it. Joe Flacco, a future Hall of Famer in some conversations, but a quarterback in the absolute twilight of his career, hanging on by tape study and toughness. Kenny Pickett, a former first-round pick who got run out of Pittsburgh and hasn't done enough anywhere else to lock down a starting role. Dylan Gabriel, drafted 3 rounds before Shedeur, sure, but a quarterback with real questions about his size, his ceiling, his ability to function against NFL-sized defenders. And then there's the elephant in the room, Deshaun Watson, a contract that is functionally the financial equivalent of a cinder block strapped to the franchise's ankle, dragging them to the bottom of the pool. That is the room Shedeur Sanders just walked into. And here's the paradox. On paper, this is a mess. This is a building that has lived inside a quarterback hurricane for years and somehow looked at the storm and said, you know what, let's invite more weather. But flip the lens for 1 second and tell me what you see. Because I see something different. I see no franchise quarterback locked in. I see no first-round pick they're contractually obligated to develop in front of him. I see no clear answer at the most important position in sports. And when there's no clear answer, every single rep in training camp is up for grabs. Every throw matters. Every meeting counts. The door isn't wide open, but it's cracked. And cracked is all a kid like Shedeur has ever needed. Now here's where it gets really juicy. Because the reporting is already telling us Cleveland's real play. Stockpile picks. Load up for 2026. Chase Arch Manning. Chase the next Carson Beck. Treat Shedeur like a discount lottery ticket while the actual master plan cooks 1 year down the road. Sit with that for a second. The franchise drafted him to be a cheap roster body while quietly chasing his replacement before he's even thrown an NFL pass. But what happens if he balls out? What happens if Shedeur walks into that quarterback room, takes the keys, and refuses to give them back? The entire 2026 plan implodes. The kid who was supposed to be a footnote becomes the chip that wrecks the whole strategy. And that, right there, is the most fan-aligned plot twist this story could possibly take. He doesn't need to be drafted high to flip this conversation. He just needs one camp, one preseason, one stretch of throws that forces the entire building to stop pretending they have a plan. Now here's where I get fired up. Because everything we just talked about, the slide, the leaks, the suits in their war rooms, the message they tried to send, every single piece of it just handed Shedeur Sanders the most dangerous gift a competitor can ever receive. Fuel. Pure. Uncut. Never running out fuel. Let's not forget who this kid actually is. This is not some quarterback who showed up out of nowhere. This is the same kid who walked into Jackson State when nobody outside of HBCU football was paying attention and dragged that program into the national conversation by his fingernails. This is the same kid who transferred to Colorado, a Power 5 doormat that had been a punchline for a decade, and turned that team into the single most watched product in college football on a Saturday afternoon. This is the same kid who took absurd punishment behind broken offensive lines, got hit on what felt like every other snap, and still posted accuracy numbers most NFL prospects can't touch when they're standing in a clean pocket with all day to throw. That is not a fifth-round quarterback. That is not even close to a fifth-round quarterback. That is a competitor with a resume that the league just decided didn't matter. And listen, this is the part of the story I love, because the NFL has been wrong about quarterbacks for decades. Tom Brady, pick 199. 6 rings. The greatest of all time. Dak Prescott, 4th round. Multi-time Pro Bowler running an entire franchise. Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick of his entire draft, and within 2 years he had San Francisco 1 play away from a Super Bowl trophy. Every single time the league has whiffed on a quarterback at this scale, the player on the other end of the whiff has come back and rewritten the entire room. And in Shedeur's case, the chip on his shoulder isn't manufactured. It isn't a marketing angle. It is real. The receipts are public. The names of every team that passed on him are permanently archived. He can pull that list up on his phone anytime he wants. And then there's the locker room piece, which is where this story gets really interesting. Veterans don't care about your last name. They don't care about your dad. They care about whether you show up early, whether you stay late, whether you know the playbook cold, whether you can take a hit and get back in the huddle. That's it. And for the first time in his football life, Shedeur is walking into a building where his father isn't 5 feet away. Some people think that's a problem. I think that might be the exact environment that finally lets the world see who this kid actually is, separate from the empire. Every team that passed, every executive who whispered, every leaked meeting quote. All of it now lives in a vault he gets to open whenever he needs a reason to keep going. So let me bring this whole thing home. Let me be honest with you the way a real fan should be honest. Shedeur Sanders might not become a Hall of Famer. He might not lift a Lombardi trophy in 3 years. He might not even win the starting job in Cleveland by week 1. I am not going to sit here and sell you a fantasy. That's not what this is. But here's what this story is actually about now. This story is about what happens when a 22-year-old kid gets handed every single reason to fold, every leak, every anonymous quote, every camera pointing at his face during the worst weekend of his professional life, and he decides, on his own, that he is not going to break. That's the story. That's the only story that matters from this point forward. The league wanted to send a message. Let's say it one more time so it really lands. The league wanted to remind the Sanders family that nobody dictates terms to the National Football League. They wanted to teach every kid watching at home that confidence is only acceptable when it's earned on their schedule, on their timeline, in their language. And you know what? Maybe that message lands. Maybe Shedeur grinds in Cleveland for 3 years and quietly becomes a solid, dependable starter who never quite reaches the ceiling people once projected. Maybe he flames out, and the suits in those war rooms get to lean back in their leather chairs and say, "Told you so." That's a real possibility. I'm not going to lie to you and pretend it isn't. But there's another version of this story. The version every single fan watching this video right now is praying for. The version where Shedeur Sanders turns into the receipt. The one those 20-something front offices have to look at every Sunday for the next 15 years. The version where his slide gets studied in scouting departments for decades. The version where Warren Sapp's draft fall becomes the warm-up act for what this kid does to the league's reputation. And I'll say it plainly. There is a real, non-trivial chance that pick 144 becomes the most analyzed, most regretted, most punchline-worthy moment of this entire era of NFL drafting. The teams that passed are going to live with it. Some of them are going to live with it forever. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Don't just like this video and move on. Be in the room with me when Cleveland training camp opens. Be there for the first preseason snap. Be there when that quarterback room turns into a full-on war. Subscribe so we can watch this thing unfold together, week by week, throw by throw. Because we are not at the end of this story. We are at chapter 1. The league said pick 144. Shedeur Sanders is about to make sure nobody ever forgets that number.